All right, good morning. How's everybody doing? Doing all right? If you didn't say that your favorite day wasn't payday, we got issues. Good morning. All right, so if you've been around the point very long, you know that we gather for purpose and meaning, and the things that we do, hopefully all point to Jesus. And we have a little phrase that we say around here, right? That the Point Church exists to welcome the unchurched to become fully devoted followers of Jesus. How we do this? By pointing people to God, right? We do this by pointing people to Jesus, and we do this by pointing people to community, which is where we encourage one another and equip one another to become fully devoted followers of Jesus. And there's three characteristics of God, not his only characteristics, but three of what we think are some of the best characteristics of God that we want to be characterized by. We don't just want to receive it, but we want to demonstrate God's love, acceptance, and forgiveness. So if you're here today, thank you for being here. If you're watching online, thank you for being online as well. We're glad that you guys are with us. I'm going to start with a question today, and I need you to be honest. How many of you have ever seen someone and thought, dude, I wish I was them? Come on, be honest. Come on, some of you are lying, right? How many of you have wanted to be like this guy? Right? No, we look at somebody and we're just like, wow, they've really got it going on. There's something in their life that, you just want to be part of or have in your life. And let's be honest, social media has driven that to a point of just, man, right? Because everybody puts their best on Facebook usually, or Instagram, or whatever, and so you go on these social media pages and you see their families and they're having fun and they're playing whatever, pickleball or whatever, or they're going to restaurants together and they have all these friend groups, and you're just like, I wish I had their friend group, or whatever the case may be. Some of you may look at somebody else's career and go, wow, They actually went to college, got a degree, and are using their degree for what they went to school for. It seems like they're actually making money and having a good time doing it. Or some of you may even look at ministry. You think you see somebody in ministry, and you're like, wow, they seem like they're really making a difference in how they're serving other people. It could be you look at their family. Right? You look at their family, and maybe they come to church together. They're like the perfect little family that comes in. Their kids are well behaved. They don't act out. They're just perfect children. You're just like, how did that happen? You look at their Christmas cards, and you're just like, oh, I wish we could do Christmas cards like that. Wish we could send stuff out like that. Or maybe it's just you look at somebody and just their mindset, how they view life, how they look at life, and you're just like, I wish I viewed life kind of like they did. Or they have charisma that just, is overflowing. You're just wishing you had that type of charisma, and they just seem to be content. They seem like their life is just a life of peace, and you're just like, man, I wish I had that. Anybody in here, do you ever do that? The comparison game? You look and you think, wow, I wish I had that. I wish I had what they have. And I think what we all know, and sometimes we need to be reminded of, is that when we're seeing their current chapter in life, you may not necessarily know the whole book, the full story. You may not have seen the previous chapters that led up to this part of their story, the chapter that they're in right now. You may look at their current chapter and say, I want the story like that. But maybe you missed the chapters in their life that, maybe they would have entitled that chapter private sacrifices that they had to make. Or maybe there was a chapter in their past that was like, it would be entitled like heartbreaking loss. Or maybe there was another previous chapter that they went through that you don't know about that was overcoming insecurities. Or maybe another chapter they would have labeled like my spiritual doubts. Sometimes we don't see those chapters in people's lives. We just see kind of like what they're presenting today and their current chapters. And so I want to look, we've been in this study of the book of Ruth. And I kind of want to continue on with this theme of chapters and books, because I believe this, that the decisions that you make today will determine the story that you will tell tomorrow. The decisions in this chapter that you find yourself in today will determine the story that you tell tomorrow. The decisions you're making in life, what you do, what you don't do, where you're at, where you're not at, the friends that you're with or not with. The decisions you're making today actually determine the chapters that you will live out tomorrow. And for those of us who say, you know what, I look at this season, I look at this chapter that I'm in today, and I'm not real happy with it. I'm not real satisfied with it. I don't find the contentment. And some of us may even say, you know what, I don't really want to be in this chapter right now. If that is you, I want to encourage you, and I kind of labeled this message today, choose your next chapter. Because again, the decisions that we make today in this chapter, this season, will determine the story that we live out in the future. So let's jump into Ruth, the book of Ruth. Now, for those of you who maybe this is your first time here or just a little refresher, we're talking about this gal by the name of Ruth, who was a Moabite, and she was a widow. So a Moabite was not an Israelite, God's chosen people, but she followed her mother-in-law, Naomi, back to Bethlehem. And so she's living with her mother-in-law, who is an Israelite, God's chosen people, a Jewish person. But you can kind of see that when she comes, she's living without much hope. She doesn't have a lot of resources. However, this is what we see in Ruth. She was not a victim. She kind of refused to be a victim. And she chose to move forward. She chose to work. She chose to do something. She didn't beg for money. She actually started working in the fields. And if you remember from a couple of weeks ago, it just so happened, right, that she works in the fields of a guy by the name of Boaz, right? Boaz met Ruth. He admired her. He admired her integrity. He admired her work ethic. He admired her character. And so Boaz takes her on a little date. It's just a little lunch date, okay? Wasn't a big deal. They just had lunch together, and they talked, they communicated, they shared stories, and we would say the sparks were flying, right? However, what we know is this. Boaz just kind of like, once they had that date, kind of just dropped. He didn't even check in on her. He didn't send her anything on the gram. He didn't, become friends with her or follow her on the social. Nothing. He kind of just steps back for a few weeks. And Ruth is like, hey, what's going on in this relationship? And so last week, if you were here, you remember that Naomi, her mother-in-law, says, hey, girl, you need to determine the relationship you're going to have with Boaz. give him some hints, because he needs some hints, like most of us men do, right? We talked about this, ladies. Did you put that in your mind, that we need hints and not just subtle hints because we're dumber than a 2x4? So we need not so subtle hints, and so that's what Naomi tells Ruth. And so Ruth does. She takes the advice of Naomi, and she goes and finds Boaz. And after Boaz, he was celebrating payday, and he was asleep after filling his tummy and maybe drinking some spirits. He was in good spirits. So she, that was strategic. And so she goes and she lays at his feet, okay? And somehow Boaz wakes up in the middle of the night. I don't think she was tickling his feet or anything. I don't know. But she got his attention and says, "Hey, boy." That's what she says. It's in the Hebrew. She says, "Hey, boy, I need you to be my guardian redeemer." And Boaz is all over it. He's like, "Yes, I will be your guardian redeemer." And we know that the guardian redeemer is someone, a close family relative, who would take care of widows or another family member who was in need. They would come and redeem them. They would help them with life and making sure that they were protected. And so you have Boaz who says, "Yes, I will be your guardian redeemer, your kinship redeemer." However, there's a problem. And that problem is there's someone else by law who should be your guardian redeemer, who's a closer relative than I am. So there's a problem. There's another guy out there, another family relative. And so now they've got an issue. Boaz has an issue to work through. He's got to find this guy, okay? He's got to find this guy who's a closer relative than he is to Ruth, so that he can be her guardian redeemer. He wants to marry her and take care of her, okay? And so he's got to work a deal, all right? So Boaz has to find this dude. He's got to work a deal with this dude because he wants to pursue Ruth. That's the person that's on his heart. Now, to make this deal, Boaz, I believe, according to this story, and hear me on this. This is why I think this is the principles that we can gather out of this. That Boaz needed three things, and I believe it's three things that we need if we're going to change the trajectory of our story, if we want to move out of the chapter that we're in now to a better chapter in the future. We need three things as well. And those three things are providence, planning, and prayer. Okay? So let's just take a look at that. The providence of God. And we've been talking about the providence of God throughout this whole book of Ruth. We said that there isn't like these huge miracles. You don't see anybody coming back from the dead. You don't see any water splitting. You don't see anything like that. These huge miracles of God in this story. What you see is the providence of God working throughout this entire book of Ruth. And we know that the providence of God is whenever God uses natural circumstances to bring about his supernatural will. Because when you look at the book of Ruth, again, you see this over and over and over, that God is, it just so happens that certain things took place, right? Certain meetings happened, Ruth meeting Boaz, Ruth meeting Naomi and Moab, all these different things. It just so happens, and those are the providences of God. So, Ruth chapter 4, Boaz has a problem. He's got to find this guy who is the closer relative, okay, than he is, who should be the guardian redeemer. He's got to find this guy. And this is the kinsman redeemer. So, verse 1 in chapter 4, Boaz went to the town gate and took a seat there. Let's just stop and pause for just a second because this is kind of important. What is the city gate? Well, this is really where deals are made. Okay, so all the guys, all the councilmen, all the elders of the city would meet at the city gate, And this is where kind of deals were made. Okay, this is where you would negotiate like a land deal. This is kind of like going to a city council or going to court. And so Boaz, he goes to the town gate, takes a seat, and look at these next two words. Just then. Or, it just so happens, okay, the family redeemer, this guy he's been looking for, that he had mentioned, came by. Just so happens, providence of God. That's God working through natural circumstances to bring about his supernatural will. So the family redeemer, the guy that he's been looking for, just so happens to come by. So Boaz calls over to him. He's like, dude, come here. Do I have a deal for you? Right? Sit down here, my friend. I want to talk to you. Now, in this translation, I'm going to stop there for a second, because in this translation of the Hebrew, I believe they're being very generous. I think it's a very generous translation to use the word friend, okay? Because honestly, I think a better translation of who this guy is would be baloney alimony. I think that's probably a better word for this guy. That's actually the Hebrew term for this guy. Baloney alimony. Okay? The Hebrew, when you look at this, it's kind of an interesting take, because in the Hebrew language, if they didn't want to give anybody credit, it'd kind of be like inserting Mr. No Name. Okay? So they don't even want to give this guy any credit. They don't want to give him any props. So they don't even name him. And so what the Hebrew does is kind of inserts a no name, no credit guy. So Mr. No Name. And so Boaz sees this guy, and as the Hebrew writer puts it, who I believe is Samuel, he says, so Boaz goes, hey, Mr. No Name, come over here. We need to talk. Okay, so Mr. No Name shows up. The text says, just then. Did Boaz get lucky? Was this just a coincidence? This is, I believe, God using his ability, his natural circumstances to bring about his supernatural will. So Mr. No Name just happens to come by, and it's just the right circumstances at the time. And I would say this about the providence of God. The providence of God, when you think about your life, when you think about the lives of other people, and I think we can see it in this story, and I'm going to bring this out here a little bit, but it's almost like, the providence of God is almost like reading Hebrew, right? Because in our language, in the English language, how do we read? We don't speak it like that, but how do we read? We read from left to right, right? Okay? In the Hebrew, you read from right to left. It's just backwards, okay? Reading Hebrew is backwards to us. And this is what I would say about the providence of God. Sometimes when you look at the providence of God, you got to look backwards. It's kind of like reading the Hebrew language. You have to go backwards in time. And so to see the supernatural things that God has done in your life, wouldn't you agree, for those of you who know that God has done some supernatural things, in the midst of it, sometimes you don't necessarily see it, but you look back and go, that was more than a coincidence. That was God working things out, okay? And so I believe that that's how sometimes we can see the providence of God. And if you look at Ruth, what we're going to find is in chapter 4, she really gets blessed. But remember, okay, we can look through this and we can see with our eyes how blessed Ruth is, but you got to think about the previous chapters that Ruth has been through, right? I mean, you stop and you think about some of the chapters that she has been through. Maybe some of the chapters would have been called Suddenly and Tragically Widowed, right? That would have been a title for one of the chapters of her life. Another chapter might have been called The Faith to Leave My Homeland. Maybe another chapter would have been called Broken in Bethlehem, right? Yeah, I mean, she had a lot of things in her past. There's a lot of chapters in her past that weren't anything, that we would call blessed. They were hard. They were difficult. They were challenging. And so if you find yourself hoping for a better chapter, you might want to look at the providence of God. And you're not, hear me on this. This is what I know. If you're still taking breath today, God is not done writing your final chapter yet. God is still writing your story, and there's more to your story for Him to tell. The providence of God is always good. The providence of God is always good. Sometimes we don't see it in the chapter that we're in, but the providence of God is always good. So the second thing is that Boaz needed for him to rewrite the chapter of his story is that he needed a strategic plan. And yes, I would say this, that strategic planning is spiritual. I believe that wholeheartedly. In fact, I'm going to show you what Boaz did. It's pretty interesting. I like Boaz. Think about this. Boaz is not a pastor. He's not a priest. He's not a prophet. Who is Boaz? What we know of Boaz is he's a businessman. He's just a businessman. And where is he going? He's not studying the Bible. He wasn't going on a mission trip. What he was going to do when he meets this other person, Mr. No Name, he's making a business deal. And God was all over this business deal. Here's why I'm saying this. You can do business and still please God. Can I say that again? You can be in business and you can be making business deals and still please and honor God. I think that's important for us to know. I hope that you understand that when Boaz goes to the city gates with a plan, and he calls like 10 other businessmen together, councilmen together, leaders together, he's doing that so that there's actually witnesses to his deal. And he's going to honor God through this. So Boaz, he says, hey, Mr. No Name, I'm going to make you an offer you can't refuse. That was horrible. Thanks, Eddie. Appreciate that guy. Yeah. But it was terrible. All right. He's like, hey, Mr. No Name, I'm going to make you a deal, man. All right. So that was a mixture of Italian, Mexican, I don't know. It was all in there. I don't even know what that was. Huh? Yeah, mutt. That was mutt talk. Okay, good. All right. So Boaz gets this Mr. No Name to come over. He says, I got something to tell you. He says, hey, you remember your kinsman Elimelech. Elimelech, right? We remember Elimelech, right? So Elimelech, he says, he was married to Naomi. He runs off to Moab. He dies in Moab. Naomi comes back. She now has this land, but she needs a guardian redeemer for her daughter-in-law. And so here's what he says in verse 6. If you want the land, okay, then buy it here and now in the presence of these witnesses. But if you don't want the land, just let me know right away because I'm next in line to be the redeemer after you. How's Mr. No Name answer? Dude, I'm on it. I'll buy it. I'll redeem it. I'm all over this. He's thinking, cha-ching. That's what he's thinking. That's his business mind. And then Boaz, he says, wait, there's one more thing. Just hang on just a second. Before you say yes to this, I need to give you the entire deal of the contract. Boaz says, of course, your purchase of the land from Naomi also requires that you marry Ruth. That Moabite widow over here? That way she can have children who will carry on her husband's name. So this land is going to stay in Elimelech's family name and keep the land in the family. Now all of a sudden, Mr. No-Name's pumping the brakes. Whoa, okay? I didn't know that was part of the deal, okay? The land, that's one thing. However, with this land, I get a couple of widows. Whoa, I'm not so sure about this. I've got to marry this Moabite woman. And she has a built-in mother-in-law who's a little pushy. Nope. He's backing off of this like crazy, And so I've got to provide for both of them. I've got to purchase the land, and then I'm going to give it back to the sons in Elimelech's name, not my name, no legacy here. What kind of deal is this for me? So Mr. No-Name, he starts backing out of this. And then he says, wait a second. I can't redeem this. I'm sorry. I wasn't thinking through this so well. The family redeemer said, listen, because this might endanger my own estate, why don't you go ahead and redeem this land, Boaz? I can't do it. So Mr. No-Name, thought through this chapter, and his chapter might have said, man, this is a bad investment. That's the name of his chapter. Boaz was calling this chapter a legacy opportunity. And what we know is this. Again, the writer of this book of Ruth, Samuel, he's like, I'm not even going to show this no-name guy any dignity because he's selfish. He's more concerned with his own money than he is about the ministry or serving these people in need. So we're just going to call this guy Mr. No-Name. Boaz, he's working his plan. He had a strategic plan, and he's working it. And when you look through this story, you got to consider that actually Boaz had a plan when many people in this story did not. You think about, if we go back to the first week that we talked about this, Elimelech. His plan didn't work out. He didn't have much of a plan because he takes his family, moves them to Moab, where he shouldn't have been in the first place, and yet he doesn't have a plan for his wife and his kids. He croaks, right? And then he just leaves his wife to fend for herself. And then what happens? The two boys die. You remember them, sick and tired. They die. And they obviously didn't have a plan for their wives because Naomi's taking them under her wing. I mean, you got some ding-dong fellas here that have no plan how to protect their wives, right? And yet we see Boaz does. You see that he's thinking strategically. And that's why I want to remind that one of the most spiritual things you can do for you and your family, listen to me, parents, grandparents, have a strategic plan for your family. Spiritually, have a strategic plan. How are you going to bring your kids up to know who God is, to know who Jesus is, to know how to live, to know how to live morally and ethically, to know how to honor God with how they live. Have a plan on how you're going to do this. I think it honors God to have a strategic plan. And so I would say, well, what are your plans? Do you know your plans? If you want a better chapter, right, than the one you're living now, maybe it's time to go, hey, I need a plan. I need a plan so that the rest of my story and how my story, moves on is better than the chapter that I'm in right now. Some of you might say, you know what? Our marriage is struggling. Right now, the chapter that we're in is marriage struggles. So what's your plan? What's your plan? Maybe your plan is to, you know what, we're going to get in a life group together. We're going to get around some people that can encourage us. Maybe your plan is, man, it's to a point where we need to get some counseling. It always baffles me. It always baffles me. I'll have somebody come into my office and say, hey, we're struggling in our marriage, and I'll try to encourage them to get into counseling. Well, I'm not sure we want to do counseling. And I always wonder, you don't want to do counseling because they're going to find something that needs fixed? What is it? I don't know. But maybe that's where you're at. Maybe you need some counseling. I don't know. Or financially, what's your plan? Because it seems like many times the plans that people have is spend more than you actually make. And that's not a great plan, okay? Maybe instead, today is the day where you finally cut up that credit card, or start doing the debt snowball to get out of debt, to work a plan, to get out of the financial troubles that you're in so that your next chapters are much better than the chapter that you're in today, okay? Think about your friends' plans. If your friends, okay, just throwing this out there, if your friends are stoned 80% of the time and they're broke all the time, maybe it's time to rethink your friend's plan, okay? It's just, how do I move out of this chapter and have a better chapter moving forward? Because decisions you make today will determine the story that you tell tomorrow. The decisions that you are making right now is writing the chapter that will be published in the future. And so Boaz, he's working his plan, and he goes and he buys the land, and he becomes the kinsman redeemer, the guardian redeemer for Ruth. Verse 10. With the land that I have acquired, and with the land I have acquired Ruth, the Moabite widow of Mahon, to be my wife. This way, she can have a son to carry on the family name of her dead husband and to inherit the family property here in his hometown. And he says to the people around there, you are my witnesses to this today. What is Boaz doing? He's joining, all right? At this point, Boaz is joining his chapter with Ruth's chapter, right? And interestingly enough, as you watch this, they're joining in God's chapter. They're all three joining together in this covenant, okay? We're going through this together under the providence of God, and Boaz puts some strategic planning in place. But what I want you to see also is clear throughout this book of Ruth, you see faithful prayers being given all the way through it. Some faith-filled prayers. In fact, we've gone through this book of Ruth, and I don't know if you've seen it. I don't know if you've done some reading as well on your own, but almost every prayer in the book of Ruth is very short. You notice that? It's just a one-liner. I have people ask me all the time, how much time do you spend in prayer? And as a pastor, I will tell you, I spend at least 7 to 8 hours on my knees every day. No way. Nope. Nope. I will tell you, I don't pray long prayers. I just don't. The truth of the matter is, I don't pray very many long prayers, but I very rarely go very long without praying. You know what I'm saying? It's kind of like I'm constantly praying. If you come in and sit down in my office and you're talking to me, I'm probably praying about the situation. When I'm walking through, when I'm talking, when I'm in my daily life and moving around, I'm constantly just throwing up what I call flare prayers. Woo, God help, I'm constantly praying, but I don't necessarily pray these very long prayers. There's very few long periods of time where I'm not talking to God, but I don't necessarily do it for very long. And that's what you see throughout the book of Ruth. There's just like this ongoing, constant conversation of prayer. Let me show you some of the prayers in Ruth. Naomi prayed for Ruth. May the Lord give you a husband. Ruth prayed, may the Lord deal with me if I leave you. Boaz, may the Lord be with you. Workers, may the Lord bless you. Boaz, may the Lord repay you and bless you. Ruth, may I continue to find favor. Naomi, may the Lord bless the man who blessed you. Boaz to Ruth, may the Lord bless you. You just see these constant blessings and requests and commitments and vows being made throughout this book of Ruth. And so prayer after prayer after prayer is being prayed. And then we see the elders give this generous prayer in verse 11. Then the elders and all the people that were standing at the gate replied, "We are the witnesses. May the Lord make this woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah." That's huge. You've got this outsider, this Moabite, the people that the Israelites were not even supposed to be with. Now they're welcoming her in. They're welcoming her in as one of them. They're lifting her up and saying, may she be like a couple of our favorite women, the ones that we look up to. May she be like them, like Leah and Rachel, from whom the nations of Israel descended. May you prosper in Ephrathah and be famous in Bethlehem. May the Lord make this woman Ruth, the Moabite, who turned to God of Israel, make her one of us. That's awesome. And may she be famous in Bethlehem. How many of you know somebody else that was pretty famous that came from Bethlehem? Right? There's another person that was pretty famous that came out of Bethlehem. His name is Jesus. And he's all over this story in the book of Ruth. You see, if you read the providential power of God, and you see the strategic planning, and you hear the faithful prayers of his people, the providence of God, it's like reading Hebrew. It's better understood if you read it backwards. I want to look at this story of Jesus who came out of Bethlehem. And I want to look at the story of Jesus backwards. Because we know the gospel, right? We know the gospel. The gospel is this: the God so loved the world. God loved us. God loved all of us so much that he gave his one and only son. We know this. This is the gospel. Jesus, the spotless lamb, the perfect lamb who lived without sin, was slain for the forgiveness of our sins. He died. Jesus was put to death. He was put in the tomb, but the tomb could not hold him. Death could not conquer him. Jesus rose from the dead, right? And now, it doesn't matter who you are, what you've done. On the third day when that stone was rolled away, because of that empty tomb, anybody, absolutely anybody, that includes you and that includes me, anyone who calls upon the name of the Lord Jesus Christ will be saved. Amen. That's the gospel, right? We know this. Let's work backwards. Before he rose again, before Jesus died, before he prayed on the cross, "It is finished," before he prayed, "God, into your hands I commit my spirit to you," before all of that, Jesus actually was fulfilling the strategic plan of God. He had a plan the whole time. Paul says this: "For God saved us and called us to live a holy life." He did this not because we deserve it, but because that was God's plan from before the beginning of time, to show us his grace through Christ. God's providence has always been his strategic plan. We know that Jesus was born without sin. How did that happen? Because he came through the Virgin Mary. And the providence of God is just like reading Hebrews. It's best when you read it backwards. Because in Matthew 1, what did Mary do? Mary gave birth to Jesus, who was called the Savior of the world, the Messiah. And where did that come from? Where did that come from? Where did Mary come from? Mary was engaged to a man by the name of Joseph, whose father was named Jacob. And if you read chapter 1 of Matthew, you see the lineage of Jesus. If you look at things backwards, you say Jesus came from Mary and Joseph, who came from Jacob, and Matthew, who came from Eleazar, and Eleazar from Eliab, and from Lacham, and Zadok, who came from Azar, from Eliam, and from Abandon. Some of these Greek words are terrible. Abadud, I don't know what it is. From Zerubbabel, from Shealtiel, from Jehoshaphat, from Josh to Josiah to Amon to Manasseh, from Ezekiel to Azah, from Jotham to Uzziah, from who came from Jehoshaphat, who came from Asa, who came from Abijah, I need a vowel, who came from Rehoboam, who came from Solomon, who came from David, who came from Jesse, who came from a guy by the name of Obed, who was born from Boaz and Ruth. If you read this thing backwards, where did our Messiah come from? Boaz and Ruth. Isn't that awesome? Because you see, the providence of God sometimes is better when we look at it backwards. When you look backwards, you see the providential will, the power, the plan that our good God is working the whole time, who is working in the good chapters, and he's working in the bad chapters, but he's working in all the chapters to accomplish his will. God, who is working every single moment, every single point, and it doesn't matter what chapter you're in. This is what I know, that God's grace and his glory is at work in you and around you. So whatever chapter you're in, hear me on this. Some of you came for this very moment. Some of you are watching right now for this moment. Whatever your chapter you are in, God is with you. He hasn't forsaken you. He hasn't left you. God is with you. And he's still writing your story. And he's still working in this chapter to continue to finish your story. Not because we deserve it, but because it's his strategic plan. So if you think about your next chapter, when you think about your next chapter, what is it that you need? What is it that you need to do now? What is it that you need to have in this chapter to write the rest of your story? Well, you need the providential power of God, no doubt, right? You'd have to agree. But the power of God is what you need. The providential power of God, which is the best when you see it from looking backwards. You need a strategic plan. Man, good planning, hard work leads to blessings. No doubt about it. And a life dependent upon God. A life dependent upon God where you say, God, I need you. God, I need you. I need you to direct my next steps in this chapter. So God, we pray. God, we pray. God, I'm praying, and God, I'm depending upon you. I'm not walking by my side. I'm walking by faith in you. So God, help direct my steps. I need your guidance. I need your power. I need your wisdom. And what I want you to know, hear me on this, that if you put your faith and trust in Jesus Christ, God has a plan for you. He has a plan not only in this chapter that you're in, but in the chapters to come, as he continues to write your story. And his plan isn't just to make us happy. Hear me on this, man. God's plan isn't just to make us happy on this earth or just to give you a better house or a better job. God's plan is always this. God's plan is for you to know him better. God's plan is always to transform your hearts and your minds away from this world and into his perfect will. To be spiritually at peace and have a God-like life. That's his plan. So no matter where you're at in this chapter, God's still helping you. God's still working things in your life. Maybe it's time to seek that plan, to pray about it, to follow through with what God has gotten stored for you. Because God's not done writing your story yet. So God, today, thank you for giving us the story of Ruth and Boaz. Thank you for showing us that even when life is hard and we're far, far from you, that you can draw us. If we repent and we turn and we take those even difficult steps towards you, God, you've got a plan for us. So God, help us to see your providence in our lives, that you are working. So we look back in our life and see some of the things that have taken place that have drawn us closer and closer to you. And God, help us to know what our plan is. What our plan is for moving forward, the things that we need to do, the action steps that we need to do to draw closer to you as we finish out the story that you're writing for us. God, today I pray that each of us would seek you. Seek you through prayer. Seek you through your word. Seek you and your presence in our lives, because we know this. Your word promises when we step towards you, you come running to us. God, help us to know that. In the midst of the chapter that we're in today, God, help us to recognize that your presence and your peace and your power and your protection are with us, writing the story that you have for us. And we just pray all this through the power of your Spirit and in the holy name of Jesus Christ.